Welcome on in. WIP Daily, Joe Giglio with you. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribe, and follow the podcast. Tucker will join me in a few minutes. He's back from his trip to London. We'll get his thoughts on that trip and the Phils and checking them out over at the London series, which I thought just was a great job by Major League Baseball. But yesterday, good news on the field. Phillies win. Wheeler is incredible. Just like the most unassuming star in maybe all sports, but certainly Philadelphia. Zach Wheeler just rolls and just dominates. It makes it look so easy. Schwarber, June actually started yesterday, not on June 1st. So Schwarber hits a pair of home runs, and the Phillies get a nice win last night up at Fenway Park. It's a pretty average Red Sox team. But the story was before the game, and that's JT Realmuto. We heard the news right at the end of the midday show yesterday, headed for meniscus surgery, and it's a major blow. Let's just call it what it is. It's a major blow to the Phillies because JT Realmuto, based on his backups, based on how much he plays, based on how good he is relative to other catchers. He's not the best catcher anymore in baseball, but he's certainly still probably a top 5 or 6 catcher in baseball. It's a blow to the Phillies. There's no question about it. So let's get into how big of an issue this is, what they could do in the meantime, how long he'll be out, potential trade options if they want to go that route. But my first thought is they're going to be okay. I know this is one of those things where it's like, uh-oh, and you start kind of adding up the injuries they've now had over the past couple months. And you look at the lineup they threw out there last night, which really was just rescued by some poor defense by the Red Sox and a couple bombs by Kyle Schwarber. It wasn't like they hit the cover off the ball last night. And you say, are they going to be okay? And my thought is, yes, the Phillies are going to be okay for a couple of reasons. One, I'm not panicking here. JT is a tremendous player and one of the most important players. But let's not lose focus on the big picture here. Number one, this team has a lot of experience in the last few years getting through long-term injuries from stars. They just do. Bryce Harper in 2022. Rhys Hoskins for the entire season last year. Trey Turner so far this year. And that's 3 years, 3 of their better players all miss extended periods. Bryce, it was couple months, right, when he got his hand broken or his finger broken, thumb broken on the pitch by Blake Snell in late June, came back in late August. They got through the entire summer without Bryce Harper and were in position to do what they did in October. Last year, Rhys Hoskins was taken from them and didn't play an inning, didn't take an at-bat the entire season. They made it to Game 7 of the NLCS and actually won more games than they won the year before. And then this year so far, Trey was having what you could be considered a bounce back, certainly offensively, was in about 340, and looked more of the player that they thought they signed than the year before. Taken out of the lineup suddenly with the hamstring injury. This team hasn't missed a beat. And offensive shortstop has been, I'd say, better than it was with Trey, or if not better, very comparable. When you add all the numbers together, probably an OPS in the 800s, and Trey was an OPS in the 800s, almost a negligible difference, right? Like barely anything you notice because they had depth. Now, this will be a little more challenging, but the Phillies will get through this. They have a tremendous team led by a tremendous pitching staff. Now, you do have to factor that JT's a part of that pitching staff. He's a big part of the game planning and the defense back there. So, you lose Trey, you lose Rhys, you lose Bryce, or you lose whoever, and you say, well, we'll still pitch our way to victories. And I think they'll still do that, but you can make the point that obviously Realmuto is a big part of why they're such a good pitching staff. Though last night, Zach Wheeler went out and did his thing and pitched well. There's not one offensive player, and Schwarber may be a unique one, and obviously Harper because he's their best one, but that I'm going to lose a lot of sleep over a 5 or 6 weeks absence to, because this team isn't built and they don't play to offense. I know they still rank near the top in Major League Baseball in offense. I don't look at them that way. I said early April, I thought they were missing a bat. I thought this is closer to an average offense than a great offense. We'll see where it finishes. They could finish number 1 on offense, and that looks silly. I still think they're going to end up, somewhere in the 7 to 10 range in runs scored. I don't think they're a great offense. I think they're going to win, and they're going to win over 100 games because of a tremendous pitching staff, because of 4 or 5 lockdown relievers, 2 of which belong in the All-Star game with Strom and Hoffman, and a starting rotation that 4 out of 5 nights, you just expect 0 after 0 after 0. And the top 3 in the rotation, someone posted a stat last night where I saw if you add the numbers up for Wheeler and Suarez and Nola, and you kind of just look at those 3 this season together, it's like 250 innings, low 2 ERA, a WHIP under 1. And I looked at the numbers and I'm like, that's Justin Verlander when he won the MVP. Like the Phillies are getting 3 out of 5 nights when you add the production together, MVP pitching, not just Cy Young, MVP pitching. So I'm not going to lose sleep over losing a good player and a big bat for 5 or 6 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it's going to be, because they pitch. The Phillies could win a lot of games over the next month, 3-2. They could win a lot of games 4-2, 4-1, the way they did last night. So that's one. One reason is this is a pitching team. Two, they've gotten through a lot of these kind of injuries. Now, all that being said, JT's one of their more irreplaceable players. The drop-off between JT and the next guy is significant. I mean, it just is. And, Marsh, they're going to – what they have now at the backup catcher, Rafael Marchand coming up to be the number 2, and Garrett Stubbs to be the number 1. It's not great. I mean, it's not. It's a defensive duo. Any offense they get out of that position is going to be – it's going to be a bonus. But, I don't expect much. I mean, if those two combine to post a 580 OPS over the next month, I would be thrilled with that. I mean, that would be slightly above Rojas production. I'd be thrilled with that. Now, you start to look at the lineup and you say, it gets thinned out. Now, I think it's important to note that Trey Turner is due to come back very soon, whether it's this weekend in Baltimore or it's the beginning of next week back at home. It looks like he's about to come back. And there's not going to be a rehab assignment. He's turning down that option as a veteran. He can. So, barring something very unforeseen in the final stages of his ramp back up, he's going to be back in the lineup and slide in the number 2 spot. So it's this weird thing where they're not going to be whole for a long period of time this season, but the timing of the injuries actually kind of works out a little bit, that JT's going to get this surgery now. And then, Turner will arrive back to take that number 2 spot in the order. And they need him. I mean, they need Trey to come back and at least hit the way JT has, because you look at the rest of the lineup, Castellanos, you never know what you're getting. Bohm's numbers have cratered since the beginning, or since the end of April. I mean, his OPS was over 1,000. And now look at it, it's about 800. I mean, we're close to dipping under 800. That means in May and June, it's gone way down. So they need Trey back. But I add it all together. I think they'll get okay game calling, okay, good enough defense. I don't think Stubbs is a poor defender. He's just small. I think his strike zone is smaller compared to JT, and the pitchers have to adjust. But I think Stubbs calls a fine game. Marchand has been looked at as a defensive catcher his whole life, and that's why he's had some prospect pedigree. They're getting Trey back. They're used to this in terms of losing players. And let's not lose sight of this. They have a 10-game lead in the National League East. 10 games. That is an enormous cushion if they do over the next month. And Dabrowski said yesterday it's going to be a month for JT Realmuto. The All-Star break's 5 weeks away. I'd be surprised if we saw JT before the All-Star break. Bringing him back, right at the early end of that time frame, right before the All-Star break, feels a little silly. It doesn't make as much sense to me. I think they'll slow play this thing, and we'll see him hopefully right after the All-Star break, 6 weeks or so from now. That makes more sense to me. So can they get through this? Yeah. And even if the Phillies play, they've played about 700 baseball this entire season. If they play more like 600, 580, 590 baseball over the next 30-something games without JT, and against some of the tougher teams they're going to see, they will see Atlanta, who stinks right now, but Atlanta should figure it out at some point. They'll see the Dodgers in this mix. They'll see the Cubs, who have been kind of up and down. They'll see, obviously, the Orioles this weekend, which will be a major challenge. So they'll see some better teams here, but if they play 590 or 600 baseball, that's fine because they have a 10-game lead. The Braves, since they won the first 2 games, have been barely over 500 for 2 months. They barely have outscored their opponents over the last 2 months. They've scored the least runs in baseball since the end of April. I mean, the Braves are a mess right now. So are the Braves going to have some life here because JT's out and the Phillies might have a little bit of a bumpy patch? Maybe the Braves pick up 2 or 3 games over the next month. Again, the Phillies would be up 8 or 7 games at the All-Star break. That's totally in a good space. So I'm not panicking at all. Now, if this was a bigger issue, if this was the kind of surgery that could jeopardize JT's season, that's a different story, because I think it'd be very challenging to try to go in the playoffs and win big games without JT Realmuto. Now, there is one other option, and we'll bring on Tucker to talk about his thoughts on JT and also the trip to London he went on and seeing the Phils out there. There is the option of the Phillies adding to the position. They don't have to sit on Stubbs and Marchand and just say, go ahead, go get him, guys. No, they could go get a catcher. Now, there's not many teams, I believe, in mid-June that are ready to give up. I think I saw this morning 25 of the 30 teams are within 4 games of a playoff spot. That's what happens when you have all these playoff teams and wild cards that nobody's really buried, especially in the NL, where 500 is probably going to be that last wild card or right around there, 82, 83 wins. Anybody with any sort of pulse could feel like they've got a shot right now. So it's going to be difficult to pry a catcher away from any team that feels like they have a shot. So there's probably a small handful of teams. And how many of those teams have catchers you want or backup catchers you want? The pool is probably thin. The one guy that makes some sense, and he's actually hit against the Phillies over the years, Jacob Stallings hit the home run off Alvarado a few weeks ago in Colorado, former Pirate, former Marlin, good defensive game caller. I think he's a solid backup catcher, certainly an upgrade over Stubbs. So I'm sure the Phillies could trade for Jacob Stallings tomorrow if they want. I mean, what the Rockies holding on to him for. And then you'd have an option when JT gets back of choosing between Stallings and Stubbs. I think they could do that. It would make them a slightly better team the next few weeks. If there's one big swing, and this is a bigger picture thing down the stretch, if they think JT needs maybe some DH days or can only play half the time to kind of ramp himself back up before the playoffs, there's a player in Toronto. The Blue Jays are probably on the verge of becoming a seller the next few weeks. Dalton Varsho. Just keep that name in mind. Very unique player. He's a former catcher who's now become a Gold Glove caliber outfielder. But that catching history is in him. It was only a couple years ago. It wasn't like 8 years ago, like Kyle Schwarber or Bryce Harper when he was an amateur. Dalton Varsho used to catch and play the outfield. Now he's just been an outfielder the last 2 years for the Blue Jays, but he's a hitter. He's a good offensive player. I don't know, but could he go back to catching half the time? And then it almost solves both of your issues down the stretch of the season into the playoffs. A good power bat for the lineup that could probably end up in left field for the postseason or right field or center. He could probably play all three. And then also give you a hedge at catcher if JT needs half the days off in August and September to preserve himself. That's a name that I find interesting. I don't know if he's available. I don't know if the Blue Jays are actually going to sell, and it would cost a good amount. But that's like a maybe possibility if they want to get creative to fix this situation or help the situation down the stretch. But big picture, I'm not panicking here, Tucker. It's a blow. I mean, JT not being around for 4, 5, 6 weeks is a blow. I think they're going to be okay. The 10-game lead is an amazing cushion. It's
unbelievable. And I looked it up last night because you think back to the last great run of success this franchise had. How many times did they lead the division by 10 games? The answer is once. It was in September of 2011 when they finally got over that hump. Other than that, actually, someone else tweeted out this morning, the only time that they've led this early in the season was on June 11th, 1993. Was the last time they had a 10-game lead in the division, I think, before the All-Star break. It's unbelievable what they've done. And when you look at JT Realmuto and maybe finding his replacement, I just don't know if it's worth it, right? Like finding an upgrade to backup catcher where you have Marchand and Stubbs are pretty much going to platoon, I think. I think Rob Thompson said they're pretty much just going to go every other game, flip them back and forth and see what works. I just think it's going to cost too much for a guy that when JT Realmuto returns, he's just not going to play, right? That's why they've been able to get away with having Garrett Stubbs at the backup catcher position. Maybe someone like Dalton Varsho would make sense because he can play outfield. It's the son of Gary Varsho, former Philly. He's named after Darren Dalton. So, like, on a semantics, it's a little sentimental, maybe bringing Dalton Varsho in. But I just think if you're going to replace his offense, it's going to come from the guys who are already here, right? Trey Turner coming back, Brendan Marsh coming back, maybe Castellanos or Alec Bohm or Bryson Stott, who's been pretty terrible for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Maybe they kind of step up. But, I mean, even watching last night and just a methodic win, the way they do it. They kind of make the routine seem spectacular every night. Kyle Schwarber hit 2 home runs. Zach Wheeler threw 7 innings, and they take him out because Matt Strahm needs work. Like it wasn't like he was laboring. It was his time to go hit the showers, and we'll move on. I mean, what this team has done so far feels weird saying, hey, you lost a guy that you tout as the best catcher in baseball, and it's okay. Garrett Stubbs will hold it down. But at this point, that's what this team has done now through the first 2.5 months of the season.
Yeah, and I remember a similar kind of thought when Turner went down. It was like, uh-oh, and then all they've done is win since. I mean, that's who they are. That's what the Phillies have been the entire season. They're going to be fine. I mean, they're going to be okay here. If they were up 1 in the division or 3 in the division, that's a different story. But they have a cushion here. That's an incredible statistic on the last time they held a lead this big. In 1993, at this same date, in the NL East. That's a long. I'm trying to guess who that was over. Probably maybe the Montreal Expos may have been the team that was chasing them in '93, and maybe 10 games behind at that point. But whatever. I mean, that's a remarkable stat. The Phillies are going to be fine. JT, get the surgery, come back. All-Star break is a little extra buffer there. No panic on the Phillies because this team is just that good. And when you pitch this well every night, you could get away with some dead spots in the order, which obviously catcher's going to be over the next month or so. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, following WIP Daily. We'll talk soon.